Welcome to the Daily Horror Habit Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Krieger, bringing you daily reviews of currently streaming horror movies for your twisted pleasure. Be aware that these reviews may include mild spoilers. And as always, I hope you enjoy. Today's episode is a little bit different, and today's guest and I aren't breaking down a film, but rather a trailer, due to us being unable to contain our excitement. And it isn't a horror film, but stick with us, and I think we'll make a solid case for why this trailer indicates the film will have a strong, horror-adjacent aesthetic that will make it an unconventional superhero flick. And here to discuss is returning friend of the show, Berto, to help me break down the hot off the presses trailer for Matt Reeves' The Batman. What's going on, Berto?
What's happening?
This is a little different than what I usually do, and it's not strictly a horror movie, but I think we'll both make a good enough case for the fact that this is very unconventional for a superhero movie, just based off of this 2-minute and 20-second or so trailer.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, so this trailer was released during the past weekend, during DC Fandom, which was DC Comics, basically like a digital convention that they had where they were releasing lots of tidbits about DC Comics that are coming out, movies and games and whatnot. And this trailer, I would say, is the most excited I've been for anything superhero related in probably like the last 5 years. I feel like we're just so inundated with superhero things constantly, and whether they're touted as being darker or they're being touted as being silly team-up movies, I feel like we're just given a lot of marketing jargon, whereas the final product very rarely, even like trailers, early indications, they rarely kind of line up with that marketing. Just based on this trailer alone, like it's a pretty jarring compared to like what we're familiar with past Batman films, as good as they might be, the past ones. What was your overall kind of just feel on this trailer?
Dude, I personally liked it. I feel like this is the darkest we've seen Batman. Just like the energy and like just you can tell that he at least from the trailer. Like I know sometimes trailers can be like very tricky because they have a nice trailer, but the movie itself is not as good. So I'm excited to see how the whole thing comes out. But based on the trailer, I think this Batman seems very dark and very like he doesn't have many lines in this 2 minutes that we get to see him speak. He only speaks like once, I think, and he has like this roaring voice. I think Robert Pattinson is playing Batman, and his voice just seems very Batman-esque, I guess. I feel like that's what I would imagine, and just I feel like I really love the darkness of the trailer. Like not like it's just like the evilness of it. It just seems so great, very fitting.
Yeah, and I mean this isn't the first DC movie that has been advertised as being dark. You know what I mean? Like there's always that kind of that rather juvenile comparisons between Marvel and DC, where people say like, oh, DC comics are the gritty and the dark superhero movies, whereas Marvel movies are more about the kind of like larger than life popcorn-esque movies and whatnot. But I don't know that a lot of DC movies actually live up to this idea of being dark and being gritty. I think for the most part, DC movies tend to be viewed as darker because they're literally shot darker. You know what I mean? Like they don't have the kind of vibrant color palette that a lot of the Marvel movies rely on. Whereas Matt Reeves, the Batman, actually seems like it is a film that is constructed around a more almost gothic setting and just aesthetic overall. And that's why in the intro, I referred to this as being kind of horror adjacent, because it isn't set up or it isn't presented as being this big popcorn movie with massive set pieces and a vibrant color palette and kind of like very reserved traditional portrayals of a hero. Yeah. And I think that comes across, it's in the opening moment, and the opening moments of the film. I mean, the reason it's so jarring is that it opens unlike anything we've seen in a superhero movie. I would say it feels almost entirely like Seven, like David Fincher's Seven. Like we get an opening shot of this masked man that's wrapping up somebody's head in duct tape, and then there's blood on the walls and there's blood on the duct tape mask, and it was the first thing I thought of. Yeah, like it feels like a crime scene, and it is.
Yeah, that's something like you mentioned earlier, like the DC not living up to the darkness of the actual comics. I feel like that's something that they've been trying to battle so much with Marvel to try to live up to that high revenue kind of thing. They kind of lost themselves in the process. And I feel like this movie has potentials to bring them back to what DC actually is, which is a darker version of Marvel. And I really hope it does live up to it. And I really hope that it does do its job in the sense of showing that how true dark Batman can be. And I hope this movie's rated R.
Yeah.
Because I feel like a lot of comic books and like comics movies are very scared of making movie rated R. Like, especially DC. Like, I feel like we lost that with like the Justice League one. And like, I feel like it could have been darker and it could have been better had it been rated R, because they just want to promote it to like younger kids. Right. But everybody knows that young kids are going to watch rated R movies regardless. Yeah. So it's like, what's the point of limiting yourself to a certain, like, you know, a certain amount of blood or violence when either way they're going to watch it because they love the character? And it's like, I feel like you have to be able to like push yourself to that limit of like making it rated R. And I really hope it is, so we can really get the full like sense of Batman in the actual DC world being dark as they've been saying it should be.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of the comparisons and the kind of trying to match Marvel's output in terms of movies and stories, it all comes down to scale, right? It's like the Avengers movies could not be bigger in scale. You've got, especially in Endgame, you've got 200 heroes fighting endless waves of CGI monsters and Thanos and all this stuff. But in terms of Matt Reeves' Batman, from the opening moments of that trailer, it feels like it's a very small scale. And with that small scale, the benefit is that you get something more refined. You can get something that pays more attention to a smaller cast of characters, smaller environments. And in that small scale, really, you have to focus on making sure things like texture come through. You have to make sure that each and every line of dialogue or action, since there isn't much of either of those happening, you have to make sure each one, again, is refined in a way that gives it purpose. Almost like in an Avengers movie, not that I'm shitting on Avengers movies and Marvel, like I enjoy a lot of those movies for different reasons, but in those movies, when you've got a fight scene with 30 people on screen fighting and there's an explosion every 5 seconds, you don't really have to focus on detail because you're kind of caught up in the adulation of everything, and this is blowing up, that's blowing up, this color palette's coming in, this character is being introduced. Whereas in this trailer, we start with just a crime scene and there's two characters, one's a corpse and one's a villain. And just in that shot alone, you're focusing not only on those two characters' action, but just the setting in general. And that's why David Fincher's Seven was the first thing that stood out to me, in that this feels very different than anything that we've seen so far in Batman. And over the years, like, I enjoyed the Nolan movies for what they were. And I think that Affleck's Batman in Justice League, or in Batman vs. Superman rather, had its ups and downs. You know, I think Justice League as a whole was a little bit unstructured and not really what I want. But I think his portrayal of that character definitely had its ups and downs. But in this movie, it feels like we're returning to the baseline Batman, where he's a detective. He's the world's greatest detective. Sure, he can beat the shit out of thugs and he can fight these meta-human villains, but at the same time, he's not saving the world in terms of this film. Like, that's not the scale of this movie. And in that, I think returning to a baseline is going to allow this to succeed in venturing into this new kind of gothic aesthetic.
I'm excited for it. I'm really looking forward to seeing how they go about it. To me, I just hope they don't go back to the origin story that we've seen every single Batman movie, where it's like, oh, how did he become Batman? It's like, that's so repetitive, and like everybody knows the history of it. I just hope they have a story and they tell it. And I have a feeling if they stick with it, the very dark of what Batman should be, this dark image and very aggressive guy, I feel like I think it would be one of the better Batmans. And it seems like it has potentials to be one of the best Batmans, other than Christian Bale's version, which was one of, I would say, definitely my favorite Batman. And I think it's the best one out so far. But I think if they were able to execute on the real dark villainesque of what Gotham City is, I think it's going to be a great movie, and I'm excited for it.
Yeah, so we don't know the specific details of the plot, but we do know a few things. So first, the movie's definitely coming out next year, 2021. I've seen a lot of conflicting months. One place I read said it's going to come out next summer. Another place said, a couple places said October. So we know 2021 for sure. They've only filmed 25% of the movie, apparently. This trailer was based off of 25% of that footage, which I think if you've only filmed a fourth of the movie and this is the trailer that you were able to present to us, and it's of this caliber, I think that's pretty telling of the overall quality of the movie in terms of just what they're focusing on. And it makes me even more excited to see how they're going to evolve on this and to see if they're able to stretch that into a 2-hour movie in a way that, like you said, in the past, there have been some of these movies that have been sold via a trailer and then don't really pull it off. But I don't know how many of those films had a trailer that was of this high of quality and it's this unique of a take on Batman. One of the small plot details we know is that the film takes place 2 years into Batman's career. So what I'm really hoping for is that's an indication that it's not going to be focusing on his come up. Because like you said, we are been told that story ad nauseum by now. Like we get it. His parents get murdered. He goes off and trains and he's got all of this money that allows him to travel and whatnot. And then he comes back and he has to save his city. Like I'm hopeful that Matt Reeves, Matt Reeves, for people that don't know, directed Cloverfield, and more recently he did the Dawn and War of the Planet of the Apes movies. So he's somebody that knows how to tell unique stories in a way that might defy somewhat of what you would associate with the different genres those films are in. So I really am hopeful that he is able to foresee that pitfall of just kind of focusing on, we need to spend 45 minutes on his origin. Like, I'm really hopeful that he is going to just kind of leap over that pitfall, because that's at least one of my biggest complaints with a lot of those superhero movies, that it's like, this character has been around for like 50 or 60 years. We got it. Like everybody, from people like us that read comics and watch comic book movies to our parents that don't know what the fuck we're talking about when we talk about these things. Like everybody knows Batman's story. Everybody knows Superman's story.
Yeah. I feel like those are the basic stories. But like you were saying earlier today, you were saying that this was based on 25% of the film. I hope this is not the best 25%. I really do. Because I mean, sometimes I feel like if you only filmed this much of the movie and if you release 25%, I hope they didn't put themselves in such a tight situation and pressure of this expectation that we're waiting for. And then it's like they have to kind of like force themselves to do certain things that they weren't originally planned, because now they have this pressure of them succeeding and making sure that they can execute to the high level of the trailer. I just hope that they didn't put themselves in, basically corner themselves in a corner, and it's like, oh shit, now we have to succeed because we have this pressure of the trailer got so much great review that we have to execute it to the best.
I mean, they said that 2021 release date even in the trailer, but I mean, with COVID and everything right now and shooting, you really don't know how far back this is going to push release dates. And I mean, if you're going to show this trailer, you have to give people hope, like people need hope right now for when things are getting released. So including that might just be giving people hope. But I mean, we don't know how the next 6 months are going to shape up. So I'm not dismissing the idea that this film could be pushed past October of next year. But if it's so that way they can get that last 75% of footage to match the initial 25%, like, I don't give a shit. They could take a whole nother year. Like, great. I'm dying to see this based off the trailer, but it's one of those things where the creatives need to be given the allotted time to succeed on their vision. And we've seen past DC films where that has not been the case. Things have been rushed, or there's been so much editing and fuckery that happens in post-op that the original vision that's marketed doesn't get succeeded on. So for me, if you're going to do a new Batman movie with a new Batman, you better take all your time. But I'm really excited too about the cast of characters that we're getting in this. They're ones that we haven't seen in a Batman movie in 20, 30 years. So some of the confirms, which we obviously see in the trailer, are Catwoman, who's played by Zoe Kravitz. We have the Penguin, who's played by Colin Farrell. We have the Riddler, who is in the very beginning of the film, and he's played by Paul Dano, which I'm really, really excited to see Dano play that. We even have Andy Serkis, who plays Alfred. There's John Turturro, who plays Carmine Falcone, who is a major crime boss in Gotham. And so he's he hasn't been in the films as much as he was in like the animated movies and the comics. And he is really like a staple of Gotham City. And he pops up in the Nolan movie at one point, but at the same time, he is not nearly shown as being the overarching kind of gangster that's running the politicians and the police and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see John Turturro's take on him. And then we have James Gordon, Commissioner Gordon, who's played by Jeffrey Wright. Just based off of that cast of characters alone, though, I think that it's great that they're highlighting characters that have not been a focal point, especially in the Nolan movies. We're getting, I mean, Catwoman was in the Nolan movies, but since this is only 2 years into Batman's career, this is going to be like an early on Catwoman. Like we can even see in terms of her getup, like she's wearing a ski mask. She doesn't have, she is not nearly the high caliber thief that she is when we meet her in the Nolan movies.
I'm excited to see Colin Farrell though. He's playing the Penguin.
So we see just a brief glimpse of him. There's that scene in the trailer where it's like a shootout, and then he's there's a car chase. That's Colin Farrell. And they did such a fantastic job on his makeup. I didn't know that until I read about it this morning.
Now I want to go back and I gotta go back and rewatch that because I missed that part. Shit.
Yeah, I watched the trailer probably.
And he's playing the Penguin. I wonder. Because I feel like I have an image of the Penguin of the original one, like the big fat guy. So I wonder how they're gonna do that. That's gonna be interesting to see.
Well, this is what I love so much about. Again, we're coming back to Reeves's vision of Batman and how this is. Again, I keep referring to it. It's a horror podcast, but I keep referring to being horror adjacent. This idea that it is a darker take on Batman, but at the same time, from all intents and purposes, what we've seen, it doesn't look as though they're taking anything away from the identity of the characters. The classic 90s Batman movies where we had like Joel Schumacher, Tim Burton, they looked cartoonish. And that's not a knock against those movies because that was the vision that they had. And then with Nolan's trilogy, we saw them trying to ground this universe and this world. And in this, I feel like it's being grounded even more so. Like we've got Penguin and he's not this cartoonish guy that waddles, that's like 500 pounds.
Big nose.
And he doesn't look like Danny DeVito from Tim Burton's Batman. But that attention to detail and just making him look, he just looks like a gross dude. And that's always been the identity of the Penguin. But they're able to do it in a way that it's terrifying to a certain degree or it's uncomfortable. It's not just like cartoonishly gross. And then we even see that with the Riddler, where the Riddler was in the Joel Schumacher Batman back in the day. But then at the same time, in this one, he just looks like a serial killer. He's got this leather mask on with goggles. You can't see his face. You can't see any of his skin. He's wearing gloves and all this stuff. And that is important because, again, it doesn't look like a superhero movie. And that's been the thing that I think DC and all studios, for the most part, have failed to do. They've been talking about it for 20 years about how they're trying to make comic book movies more serious and tell these stories in unique ways when they haven't really been doing that.
Yeah. I mean, they've been really trying to stick with the superhero part of it.
Right. And
I feel
that's the thing. There's always been this argument between comic book fans like, oh, you read comic books, I read graphic novels or whatever. But it's like you could tell stories in either medium with those same characters. It's just about the ways in which you approach the world.
Right.
I mean,
no, I'm excited to see the, like you said, feel like this movie is going to be very grounded, very human-esque, unlike the other movies where it's like Jim Carrey played the Riddler and he had this weird, like cartoonish, like you said, like with the Penguin, he's very cartoonish, like, and this is going to be more based on, it almost has like this like true detective darkness to it, like in that sense. So it's like, these are actually people. There's some superpower to it, but like, to an extent, I feel like they have a potential to really go there where it's like, these are actual human beings that are crazy and they do kill like people. And it's like, I'm very excited to see that real, like, kind of like what Christopher Nolan did with the Batmans, where it's like, he brought it more grounded, more into like this human-esque feeling to it. Like there's people behind everything. And I feel like I hope it goes that way. I hope it kind of just keeps pushing that along where it's like less cartoonish and more of human part of there's humans behind the mask and stuff. But I'm excited to see Andy Serkis as Alfred, because I feel like he's such a talented, like I feel like he's a very underrated character or actor in general, because he's so good with the CGI. I think he was one of the first big CGI actors, but like to see him even in Black Panther, he played the bad guy, and I thought he did an amazing job.
Yeah.
So I'm excited. I wish he honestly, I wish he would have been a villain. I feel like he plays really well villain, but I'm excited to see how he's going to contribute to the Alfred role. Where I feel like Alfred has such an importance to Batman, but at the same time, very minimal. So I feel like, I don't know. I'm excited to see him I feel like it might be out of his comfort zone because at least I know him as always being the bad guy or playing. He was in Lord of the Rings. He played Gollum, and he has like the CGI background of he was in Planets of the Apes. Yeah. So I'm excited to see him kind of step out of that image.
Yeah, he worked with Matt Reeves on Dawn of and I believe War of Planet of the Apes too, as Caesar. But I think that's a really great point. And obviously Robert Pattinson is playing Batman, and that is very much the story that everybody's been talking about with this movie and this adaptation. They're like, oh, we finally stopped referring to him as the Twilight guy based on the last 5 to 10 years of his career and how versatile he's been. And this is the new chapter in his career. And so that's why everybody's talking about him branching into superhero movies. But at the same time, Andy Serkis is playing Alfred, and you don't have Batman without Alfred. So it's going to be interesting to see in this new take on Batman how Alfred is going to be familiar to what we know, but then also what Serkis is going to bring to it that we've never seen him bring before. Because that's the thing about all of these familiar characters, and for the most part, this stacked cast, like overwhelmingly so. Yeah. Everybody has to bring something new to the character that makes it not indistinguishable from past versions of these characters, but something that makes it unique enough that it's memorable. And I feel like that's why I'm so excited for this movie, is that if you take all of these little moments that are unique but still familiar and they complement one another, you're just stacking all of these new levels to something that, for the most part, hasn't changed in 40 years.
Right.
And not to keep bringing it back to the Nolan movies, but the Nolan movies, again, they're very grounded in reality, whereas they lose a lot of the zaniness and the eccentricness of the 90s Batman movies. But they still have this polish to them that it doesn't really feel like Gotham. And I was talking to one of our friends about this last night, in that the Nolan movies always felt like they took place in Chicago, and they just kept calling it Gotham, which is what they did.
Yeah.
But Gotham City itself, like, this is something that came up in the comics it's always been a part of the comics, but more so recently. They keep talking about Gotham City as being a character in and of itself. Gotham, the city, is as important as all of these crazy people and as the guy running around at night dressed as a bat. And I don't think it's ever been reflected that well in the Nolan movies, because it was always just Chicago as the backdrop. Whereas with this, I feel like they really are establishing this as Gotham City, and just the tone of the whole thing really speaks to that, as there's this serial killer that is the Riddler, but in portraying him as a serial killer, you have to make the city feel like, oh, this is a city that breeds killers. Whereas like with the Joker, I feel like they were like, oh, the Batman is here and crime is here, so that's why we're in this city. They didn't feel like the villains were a reflection of that city, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It feels like so at least for me, like the Christopher Nolan ones was like, there's crime going, but it's all behind the scenes. For this one, at least from what we saw from the trailer, it seems like the crime is very open and out there. Like, people are being killed. There's like, I think we get to see that scene where we first hear Batman speak. He's with a group of bad guys who have their face painted. And we get to see like, these are like groups that are like literally causing damage. I don't know. It seems like they're like out there protesting or whatever. They're doing their own thing, but it's like out in the open. Unlike the Christopher Nolan one, seems like everything's going on. Like the mafia is running things, but it's like behind the scenes where nobody sees it. Like where this, it seems like it brings this vibe of like, you can literally see people getting robbed and killed in Gotham. And it has such a darkness to it, which I wish it should have been done in the first place. I feel like for Batman and just DC in general, should have just done this to give really that darkness that belongs in Batman. But yeah, I'm excited to see how everything just comes together. And I just want to go back to the Robert Pattinson. I think his career, because he started in this trilogy of Twilight, that he has this like loving whatever story of Twilight. I feel like you said, like we get to see in the last couple of years, his career has just blown up. And I think he's been such a very underrated actor, and we really get to see how great he is. Like even in The Lighthouse, that movie was amazing. I thought it was one of the one of his better movies, at least that I've seen. And just get to see him. Like, I think he's going to be in the new movie Tenet.
Yep.
Which is a Christopher Nolan one, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So I'm excited to see him in all these movies that he's been doing. And I think he's going to be a good Batman. I'm excited for it.
What did you think of the new look of Batman? Because the suit itself looks very different, and then even his portrayal of Batman looks. I mean, him as Bruce Wayne looks completely different too. But what did you think of the suit?
Yeah,
because
I'm excited.
We really
for it.
get to see
it. Looks like it's very. Yeah, it's very gadgety. Like I feel like he has a lot of. I feel like the symbol in his chest. It looked like he could just pop it up and just throw it. I'm glad you brought that up. This is not confirmed, but there's a rumor online that because you see the type of metal that it's made out of, and it doesn't look like it fits with the suit. There's a rumor online that the metal that makes the bat is bits of the gun that killed his parents. Because if you zoom in on it, like I've seen this is like super nerdy deep dive. When you zoom in on some of the stills that they released, you can see that there's like a filing on it, and there's little grooves in the side of the metal that it doesn't match the rest of the suit. So like I could see that being like the slide on a gun, on a handgun or something like that. Wow. And just, I mean, that's a rumor, but then again, that kind of feeds into the new look of Bruce Wayne, and that Bruce Wayne, I mean, for lack of a better description, like he has a very kind of like gothic emo vibe where he's got this kind of like this short hair and then or long hair rather. And then he's got like the dark face paint on that he wears under the mask and all of these things. And just, he has a very dour demeanor that, again, taking it back to the Christopher Nolan movies, Christopher Nolan's portrayal of Bruce was very much the classic playboy Bruce Wayne. He's the pretty boy. He's handsome. He's businessman. He can hang out in a boardroom and then he can go play 18 holes on the links for meetings and things. Whereas this Bruce Wayne, his general appearance and demeanor just seems indicative of somebody that has endured a trauma. He is somebody that you don't even have to ask him how he's doing. You just look at him and you know, like, he's been through some shit. Yeah. I think that's why I'm excited about this movie, because it seems like we're so used to seeing Bruce Wayne as the business guy. He's always doing things, but like on the side, he's like a superhero. It's a lot like the Superman thing. It's like, oh, I'm going to work and then I'm superhero on my side hustle is a superhero or something. And it's like, for this one, he seems like he's traumatized by the fact that he saw his parents get killed, and he's very dark. This dark vibe to him, at least from what we've seen in the trailer. It's like we don't really get to see him do like this. He wears business suit. He seems like he's very rugged and very hurt and still like in pain, which I think could help the movie a lot and like really like show the true like Bruce Wayne. I feel like it really shows like how much pain he's feeling, because even in the Christopher Nolan ones, like we get to see, he's like, he doesn't seem like he's in pain. He's in physical pain because he gets beat up and he has to fight all these villains, but we don't really see that pain of him being hurt by the fact that his parents got murdered.
We're told a lot. You know what I mean? They spend a lot of time saying, oh, he deals with a lot of that trauma and that pain, and he talks about being in pain, but it never really comes across, for me at least.
Yeah, and I feel like we get to see that, like even in the looks in his eyes, like Robert Pattinson one, it's like you can tell that this guy's hurting. Like you said, it's a different Batman than we're used to seeing. You can see one scene, I think he's wearing a bandana, and like you can see like his eyes are all painted. Like, I don't know, I just feel like we really get to see the true Batman. I'm excited, which I'm really excited for.
The first thing that stood out, or the first comparison I made rather, was to that movie, The Crow. Did you ever see that with Brandon Lee?
Yeah.
Where he's got like the face paint on and he's very kind of like emo gothic vibe. Like that was the first thing I thought of. And I mean, that movie, The Crow, is a little more over the top, I think, and action oriented. But at the same time, it's this idea of just looking at a character and just their basic demeanor and the way they carry themselves. You can feel their trauma in a way that it adds a layer of emotional investment that isn't there when you tell people that somebody is experiencing these things. It's more evocative when they show it. But again, we don't know a whole lot of the plot, but a few things I picked up on were that Batman's relationship with Gotham police is definitely strained, because we have that scene where he's in an interrogation room and there's like 30 cops standing around him, and then he's getting into a shoving match. And then that cuts to him. It's almost a recreation of the Batman Begins scene when he shoots the grappling hook up through the stairwell. Yeah. There's another scene like that in this trailer where he shoots the grappling hook up as Gotham cops are like shooting at him. So I would imagine that the film begins with him working with them in terms of trying to solve the Riddler case. But then, as we know, Batman, he'll take it to some extreme places and then finds himself at odds with Gotham City Police.
Right. Yeah. It seems like yeah, from that those scenes seems like his relationship with Gotham City Police is gonna go down the shitter, where he gets put in this situation where it's like it's him by himself, no one else. And obviously, we get to see Catwoman, which I'm kind of excited for. I think Zoe Kravitz's going to do it. It seems like I feel like she's very fitting for that role. I mean, she's fairly young, and I feel like I don't know her background. She has like, from what I imagine, her being very gothic like. So I think it's very fitting for her.
Yeah, absolutely. She'll make a great side character. Again, we see there's a brief fight scene between the two of them.
Yeah.
So clearly they're like at odds with one another, but it'll be interesting to see because from what I've read, which might be a rumor, they're planning on making 3 of these movies. And it would be interesting to see whether Zoe Kravitz's Catwoman, this is her brief introduction, or if she plays into the main plot more so. Because if they're going to make 3 of these movies, it would make sense for them to just introduce her briefly, establish her as a villain, but then in the next 2 films show that she and Batman have a more developed relationship. But I want to go back to highlight the scene that you mentioned where Batman fights the gang, or he comes across a gang that has face paint on. And one thing that I immediately thought, I was like, oh man, I really hope they're not going to bring Joker in. But at the same time, they said, I had read that this movie is supposed to be in a different cinematic universe than Joker. Okay. But at the same time, even though Joker might not be in it, I would bet that is a Joker-inspired gang of some sort.
Yeah, definitely. You definitely get that vibe from them beating up the guy. I wish we'd have seen some blood.
Yeah,
I think that would have definitely like helped out to really like push, like really just to show off how dark this world is, this new Gotham is. Like had he been punching, he's like punching this guy, and you can hear his like face is being crunched. And I wish there was been like a little splatter of blood or something pop up, because I feel like it would really help that.
I think though that scene is one of my favorite moments in the movie because it really does speak. Even though there's no blood, it's the most savage thing I think we've ever seen in a Batman movie.
Yeah.
Whereas especially again, I find that half of this is just me referring to the Nolan movies as a barometer. But like the choreography in those movies, I don't remember being especially good for the fighting, which is one of the things that I liked about Batman vs. Superman was Affleck's Batman is like, for lack of a better word, he's like a thicker Batman, which informs his fighting style. So his fighting style is much more brutal and it's more bone crunching and it's not as technical. It's more about force. And while Affleck's character introduces this, in this trailer, they show like the savageness and it almost is kind of like sickening in a way. Like you said, you can hear every bone in this guy's face being broken, and Batman loses control of his own rage in that he incapacitates the guy, but then as the guy hits the ground, he keeps punching him in the face repeatedly. And I think that ties into Batman's kind of the psychological aspect, which I hope that the movie will get into more and just show that he's not a guy that can turn it on and off. When he's Batman, he's Batman. And for better or worse, that's going to put him at odds with the police probably. And in some instance, Alfred, who is probably his only real ally.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm really excited to see that. Like you were saying, like the psychological part of Batman. I think it would be cool to really, I don't think we've seen much of that in that sense, like in the movies in the past. So I think it'd be cool to see that. But at the same time, I wonder how they're going to go with the villain. If they're making 3 of these, I wonder what villain are we going to see that we haven't seen before? Like, I feel like it's very limited at this point, and I have a feeling that they're going to end up bringing the Joker at some point because he's obviously the biggest rival of Batman. But like, I do want to see other villains that we haven't seen before. But at the same time, we kind of already seen most, at least from what I know. I don't know how
this is what I'm most excited about, and it's very funny for us to be jumping into the future of these movies when they've only filmed 25% of the first one. But I just feel like Matt Reeves has such a good eye for grounding things in this unique way, and in taking these characters that have more often than not been portrayed as being very eccentric and over the top, it kind of speaks to this entire rogues gallery of killers that even some of the ones that are the most out there, perhaps Matt Reeves will find a way and the writers will find a way to kind of bring them down to earth in a way that is relatable to our past experiences with them, but then make them more believable. And that was, to Nolan's credit, he did that with Scarecrow. He did that with Bane.
Yeah.
And just those are just a few of those characters. But in presenting things that in the past have been presented as over the top and cartoon and overtly are cartoonish, I feel like and with Matt Reeves' clear aesthetic, it can make Batman terrifying. Those villains are terrifying. And true. I mean, Scarecrow was the scariest villain, I think, out of all of those because of how grounded he is. And he's just a guy with the Halloween mask, but kind of like you were saying earlier, getting into the psychology behind the mask, I think in this new Gotham can be truly terrifying.
Yeah. I think the Scarecrow, I would love to see him again, because we saw in the Christopher Nolan ones, we only saw him for a couple of times.
Yeah, he wasn't in it much.
I think that'd be cool. Like, I feel like he's one of those guys where it's like, we know, at least for me, at least this one of the villains that I know least about, like I've least known for me. So I'm curious to see what I would love to see his backstory. And I think if they can tie it into this, because like I feel like he's more of a psychology kind of guy, where it's like the Joker is crazy in general. We already know that. Bane is just an aggressive guy, but like the Scarecrow kind of messes with your head in a sense, a lot like the Riddler. But I would be excited to see that, a little more of that kind of villain, because Bane was cool. Tom Hardy did a great job at Bane, but at the same time, I feel like we've seen most of those guys at least twice. There's one in the 90s where we see Bane. Freezer, it's more, I feel like Freezer would be more of a cartoonish, so it wouldn't really fit with this.
That one, I was thinking that when you asked about heroes you'd want to see, and that was like, I don't know that they can really make that grounded.
Fit in.
I mean,
it'd be very
his
hard.
Identity's tied into that freeze ray pretty hardcore. But I was thinking somebody like Victor Zsasz, who was in Birds of Prey. He plays Ewan McGregor's right-hand man, the serial killer. Yeah. Somebody like him, especially if Matt Reeves is going for a more grounded kind of detective story. And that, again, that's the thing that he really drove home during his panel the other day, was making it clear that his version of the Batman is a detective story. We're taking Batman back to the base. It's not an action movie. And that's what I like about it in the trailer. There's only two brief instances of like fight scenes. We have that scene where Bruce Wayne saves somebody. They're at a funeral and a car comes crashing through, and then a guy with the riddle strapped to his chest. And I mean, he is assuming he explodes, because we have that scene where there's a big explosion. There isn't a lot of fighting in this trailer though. And so I really am hoping that a lack of violence, except a few rare instances, will make those acts of violence that much more memorable. And I think that's exactly what Batman needs, because again, in the previous films, they've been mostly action. And by the end of those movies, like the action just feels very, you're desensitized to it. It doesn't really stand out anymore. Whereas movies like Seven, 80% of that movie is detective. So the few acts of violence you see are super memorable. They have this kind of like disturbing, sickening quality to them that I think, and it just makes the violence that much more impactful and meaningful.
Yeah, I feel like if you're going to have minimal violence for this movie, the story is going to have to be great. So I'm excited to see how they're going to do that. If they are going to have very minimal violence, how are they going to? They're going to be able to tell. You have to tell a great story to keep you to keep you within the movie. Like, keep watching until the fighting scene. Because I feel like a lot of these movies, like, we know Batman as being very violent, very aggressive. We see a lot of fighting, but if he's backing up from, he's not doing as much violent scenes as we've seen in the past, then I feel like his story has to be great to really execute with everything and tie it all together. So I'm excited to see how he's going to do it.
And I think that's why the Riddler is so important, in that from just barely what we've seen, he's getting actual riddles. They don't sound goofy like the old ones. There's even some, like, he took a page out of the Zodiac Killer's book, in that there's like one of the riddles that he receives that has some kind of symbols in it, some kind of code. I feel like in the past Batman movies, his detective skills, they began and they ended through his computer. It was just him typing in stuff like, who is this person? Analyze this, analyze that. Whereas this movie is going to see a version of Batman that really has to be a detective, and taking it back to Batman's like 40s roots, where he has to roll up his sleeves and like throw his cape to the side and kind of get down and look for clues, and then actually like use, if he's the world's smartest detective, he's got to use his brain. He can't kind of just rely on a computer, which, I mean, sure, he'll use it, but at the same time, he never felt like a detective to me, at least in the other Batman movies. It always felt very much like, well, he's the world's smartest man because he's the world's richest man. He can afford this insane technology that nobody else can, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, no, it's definitely, that's going to be an definitely exciting thing, and like something new that we haven't seen with Batman. Like you said, him rolling up his sleeve and actually doing the work and using his brain. We get to see how smart he really is. I mean, like you said, we've seen him where he's rich and he has money, he can buy whatever he wants, but like we don't really get to see how smart he really is. And in this one, it seems like he's more, like we were talking about, like he's very grounded, very human-esque, where it's like he's using his brain, he's trying to figure this out, and like not just going around killing people and arresting them, you know? So yeah, it's gonna be a good one. I'm really excited for it.
So last thing, what did you think of the Batmobile?
I think it's awesome. I think it's not cartoonish. It's more realistic. I saw like the wheels were very thick, and like it's completely different from, not completely different, but I think it's a little different from the last Nolan movie that we watched, where he has like almost looks like a tank. This is I feel like it's a smaller version, and I'm excited. I think it looks great. I really liked it.
Yeah, I love that. Again, it really is an all-encompassing kind of effort on Reeves' part to ground the movie. It doesn't feel like it's $1 trillion weapon of war like in the Nolan movies, where as cool as that was, and I like that rendition because it fits in Nolan's aesthetic, in this setting though, it doesn't make sense that he has a super tank that he can crash through buildings and stuff. Whereas if it's very much like a DIY kind of Batman, it makes sense that it's this muscle car that he's souped up. It almost has like a Mad Max quality to it, where it has it spits out fire out of the back of it, but at the same time, it's not a tank. It's not something that would be easy. That's like the whole idea in the Nolan movies is nobody knows he's Bruce Wayne. And it's like, who the fuck else has that tank? Like the only people that make that is Wayne Industries or whatever. But in this, if it's made from a monster car, it's a souped up monster car. It looks like something you could make in your garage. Not that you ever would, but you could. It kind of lends itself to the anonymity of Batman. And it puts him at somewhat of a disadvantage, because as we see when he's chasing the Penguin in that brief moment where the Penguin says something like, "This guy's crazy," or something like that. Yeah. Batman's not driving a tank. So there's this idea that his car is destructible to a certain degree. He actually, it just makes the chases that much more intense, and it makes them, it doesn't make Batman feel like a god, basically, which for the most part, other than Bane breaking his back in the last 3 movies, he kind of just did feel like that the whole time, which I don't know. I mean, again, I don't want to bash the Nolan movies, but at the same time, this trailer is more indicative of what I would want from a Batman movie.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And I think there's so much potential to this, so I hope they execute it. Not to put pressure on them, but yeah, it just seems like there's so much potential to see a different Batman that we haven't seen before. So yeah, I'm excited for it.
Yeah, absolutely. But I appreciate you coming on to chat about the Batman trailer. I know we have a very long time to go before we see the final product, but I mean, that's the best trailer I think I've seen this year. And I say that pretty sparingly about trailers, but I mean, it has the qualities that I feel like a lot of trailers do not have these days. And I know the movie is very far out, but from its release date, but it doesn't explain really anything. It gives you a lot of pieces that you're familiar with, but they're presented in a new way. And it's a new rendition of something that we're all familiar with. And that makes me so excited. And I mean, I don't have to I won't watch any more trailers for this because it's done enough for me. I don't need to know all the specifics. I don't need to know every little detail. And it just grabbed me in a way that has me excited for superhero movies in a way that I haven't been excited about in a long time.
Yeah. Hopefully DC steps it up now that Marvel is kind of done with their whole series. I think it'd be a great time for DC to really step up and give the actual darkness look that they are known for, at least with their character. I think this would be a great time for them to really step it up. Yeah, it's gonna be good, and I'm excited to see Robert Pat as Batman because I was very questionable about him being Batman when I first heard about it. So now, from looking at it, I think it's very fitting. Could be very fitting. So.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to your Marvel thing for just a moment before we end the episode, but I mean, for a long time, it felt like DC was trying to compete with Marvel, whereas Marvel has always been true to this vision that they have for their movies and that trajectory. Whereas DC has had kind of an identity crisis for a long time, it feels like, where they're trying to be like Marvel, then they're trying to be like themselves, but they still are trying to be kind of like Marvel. And DC movies in general that they've tried to connect to one another have always felt very disjointed in a lot of ways. Yeah. And I think that uncertainty on the direction they want to go came through. So I'm hopeful that the Batman and, I mean, the new trailer for the new Suicide Squad movie that they showed yesterday looks promising as well. I mean, I'm hoping starting with the Batman, this is going to be a new age for DC where they're very confident and very clear in what they want to do. And they're not trying to be like anybody else. They're trying to do right by their properties and by the kind of darker mission statement that on some level they've always tried to execute on. But yeah, I'm super excited for this, and I appreciate you coming on to chat about it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Daily Horror Habit on your preferred streaming service and follow @Daily Horror Habit on Instagram and @Daily Horror Pod on Twitter.